a moment many adult children fear in silence. The moment the call comes and someone says, "You need to come now. Your parent has died." Today we're talking about losing a parent, the fear before it happens, the conversations we avoid before goodbye, and the life that continues after they're gone. For many people, that fear begins long before the final days. It begins when you notice your parent getting older, slower, more fragile, more dependent. It begins when you start wondering how much time is actually left, what has not been said, and whether you'll be ready when the moment finally comes. How do you ask your parent what they want when they may want nothing to do about talking about dying? How do you say what needs to be said? How do you live with the possibility that the ending may not give you an apology, the tenderness, or the closure you'd hoped for? Welcome back to the Caregivers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Ropoleski, and you can call me Dr. Mark. Our guest today is Angela Caldwell, a licensed marriage and family therapist from Los Angeles, California. Angela, welcome back to the Caregivers podcast. Before we begin, please subscribe or follow the show wherever you're listening. It's free. It helps these conversations reach more caregivers who need them. Angela Caldwell, welcome back to the Caregivers podcast. It's great to have you back. I hope you're well today.
I'm so happy to see you. Thanks for having me back.
Well, as you know, we have this tradition here where we jump right in. So let's get at it.
I like it.
Thinking about many adult children these days, the fear of losing their parent really begins often before they're actively caregiving day to day. They may not be managing medications or organizing appointments and providing daily care yet, but they're always watching, worrying, observing, and bracing for what's coming. Is there an early part of the caregiving experience that is unique even before caregiving begins?
It is so timely, this episode. I know you reach out to me from my clinical perspective, and I do have an answer for you, but I will say that I'm going to give you a little personal perspective too, because my husband and I are going through this now as we speak. So we are caregiving my father-in-law. As we go, he's more at the end stages, and what it's doing to me personally is it's making me look at our healthy parents who are not yet in the caregiving stage. And I am noticing precisely what you are describing. I'm noticing an almost like an isometric bracing in my body. And I am aware, and of course, now this is me speaking personally, but I'm aware clinically. So what gets stirred up is a fear we carried when we were very, very little and then repressed in order to be functional humans in the world. There's an interesting perspective I'd like to offer you here, and it's the perspective of denial. Now, denial is considered a bad thing, right? We say that someone's in denial. It's considered it's one of the stages of grief, as you know, but it's also considered a bad thing when we say like, oh, they're just in denial of how much they're sabotaging their life, or they're in complete denial of how bad this guy is for them that they're dating. And we understand denial to be a bad thing, and sometimes it is. So it certainly speaks to a lack of self-awareness. But there's a really fascinating perspective that denial is adaptive in some ways, and the denial of the reality of death is adaptive. Now, stay with me here. If you think about it, we all know on some level that we could die right now. Right this second, it is possible that a piano can fall on my head, that there can be a natural disaster, that I could have a heart attack, that at any moment I could die. Now, if I had to live with that knowledge consciously all the time, my anxiety would be through the roof. I would not ever want to go in my car, go out of my house. I would have to live in a padded cell. So in order for me to be a functional, contributing citizen of the world, I have to go into a little bit of denial about that. And what I mean by that is every morning or every night, I have to say to myself, I'll probably be okay. I'm going to live tomorrow. And that makes me able to make plans. I can make, appointments to see you. I can make lunch plans with a friend. I can make vacation plans because I'm going to just go into, I won't die. I'll be fine. I'll wake up tomorrow. Things will be okay. I'm going to be okay. When in reality, I don't know if that's true. I'm not sure if that's true. So I have to go into some level of denial for the rest of my life. So let's go. Let me back up a little bit to the kid phase. When we're very young children, we have a terror of our parents dying. terrified of it. We don't always word it in a sophisticated and elegant way, but we're terrified of it. And the more we have experience on the planet, the more we keep waking up the next morning and seeing that our parents are waking up the next morning, the more effective this death denial can be. So then we can kind of forget about it and just assume everybody's going to be okay. And what happens is we go through our entire lives with that sort of death denial, just assuming everything's going to be okay. We get what therapists like to call a mortality check. We get a mortality check when something scary happens, like maybe you get into a near car accident or an actual car accident. You might get a mortality check if someone close to you, almost drowns or has a health crisis or something, and you get a mortality check. We get a mortality check about our parents as we get older and older in life, and it usually happens in one of two ways. Either we simply become more conscious because we're getting older and we're starting to move into the latter stages of our life, and we start thinking about our own mortality, and it sort of occurs to us, oh my goodness, they're going to die. So what happens is it sort of reawakens this childhood fear that we had repressed our entire lives. And the second way that can happen is that they might have some kind of crisis. Our parents might, go into, like I said, my dad had a heart attack, and that's so scary because people die of heart attacks. And then I go into this sort of reawakening of an old childhood fear. Oh my gosh, my daddy could die. And I experience it in the beginning the way that I experienced it as a child. I experienced a ground-shaking terror because what is awakened is the old dependency I had for my very survival. It takes a minute for adults, for us, to sort of do the right math and let our logic kick in that, okay, it's okay. I don't need my daddy anymore. Now he's my father. Now I can accept the sort of natural courses of life. But I think this is a long answer to your question, but this... I think you said sort of a beginning stage, an early period.
The preclinical phase, yeah.
Yeah, preclinical phase. It's that. It's an awakening of a dormant fear.
It's interesting because I just came back from 4 days of caregiving in Montreal with my mom, who's 86, and sort of doing relatively well, but she has a few ailments. But at the same time, with that lens, as you described, sort of honed in, and you're just sort of watching and processing and sort of managing that fear. But all the while, it gives an opportunity for inroads conversationally about certain things, maybe that you haven't had time to talk about anymore or yet. I lost my dad in 2007 after he took down the Christmas decorations and died in his chair. There was no chance for anything. So it's really interesting to be comparatively experiencing what I went through with my dad and now a more gradual process with my mom. But, for many adult children, losing a parent is one of their biggest silent fears. What are they really afraid will happen when that parent's gone?
That they'll be all alone. That's the fear. The fear is an existential abandonment fear. It's so interesting because I work with, I'm a family therapist, so the types of families that I work with are not exactly the functional families, right? So I work with a lot of problem families. And even in those families, even in families where there's hostility and tension between adult, child, and parent, even when things seem not great, the idea that I could still pick up the phone and call my mom, that I could still reach out and talk to my dad, there's something childlike and comforting in that. My client recently said this thing, and it really stuck with me. I find it to be really profound. She said that that she didn't realize that she perceived herself as a daughter, as a girl, until both her parents died, and then she became a woman. And she said to me, I know how silly that sounds. I've been a woman my whole life. Of course I'm a woman, but I became a woman when I reached the top of the hierarchy. So now there's no one above me. Now there's not sort of a comforting thought in my head. Even if I don't use it, they're like, well, I could always ask my mom. Well, I can always call my dad. There's sort of a safety net. And when they die, we have this. I know it sounds irrational, but we have this, oh my God, I'm all alone. I had one client say, I'm orphaned. Now, this is a 60-year-old man, and he kind of laughed at himself. He said, I can't believe I'm saying that, but I feel like an orphan. I've lost now what do I do? And he's a perfectly successful, functional human. But he that word that he used, I think, is so appropriate. That's it. There's a somewhat irrational terror that we're all alone now. We've been abandoned. Our parents are gone.
Alone, and we need to be the expert on every topic because we have no one to call.
Yeah.
So why does the death of a parent sometimes feel like the loss that officially ends childhood, even if childhood ended a long time ago?
Oh, we're going to need days to discuss that.
We got time. And I think our listeners do too.
So, I think it was, I'm going to get it wrong. It was Freud or Adler. It was one of the old guys who said that, he said this funny thing that is so true, and I hope it resonates with your listeners, that the safest we have ever felt in our entire existence was in the womb. That was the safest we ever felt. And then we came out of the birth canal and it all went downhill from there. So even if you're in a fantastic, loving relationship, or if you have a great life and you're comfortable and successful, you've never been more safe than when you were inside the womb. And if you think about it, and I like to kind of joke with my students about this, well, yeah, your needs are met the moment you have that. You don't even, you have everything you need. You don't even have to chew. Your food goes directly to your stomach, right? Like all of your needs are met at the moment you need them, and it's cozy and safe and it's warm.
You may not even know you have needs, right?
Exactly. I mean, how wonderful is that, right? So I think it was Freud, but he sort of half jokingly made this comment that we come out of the womb and then we spend our entire lives trying to get back in. Right. And so what we do is we find ourselves, I mean, think about the part of your life of courtship when you're dating and how those early, what we call the honeymoon period of relationships. Well, if you look closely from his perspective, that period is, oh my God, it's here. It's happening. I'm here. I'm safe and I'm warm again. And I'm having all my needs met at the moment that I need them. And this is it. I found my way back home. All this to say that attachment, that's what the attachment theorists call it, that sort of neurological association, that intrinsic memory that we have of being completely surrounded by a parent, it stays with us. Isn't that weird? It stays with us. It stays with us metaphorically our whole lives. And I'm telling you, even if you have a bad relationship with your parent, there's still a fantasy in your mind that we hold on to, that we are wrapped by our parents.
It's the ultimate cuddle, right?
Oh my gosh. I love that.
The ultimate dose of oxytocin comes in the womb.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So when they die, again, it's irrational, but we can all relate to it. When they die, we go, oh my God, I've lost the womb. Well, we haven't had it our whole lives, right? We only had that for 9 months. But now it's a jarring, almost like when glass breaks in the middle of the night and you kind of are jarred awake. It's like an awakening of, oh, it's really gone. Like for real, it's gone.
When a parent's aging and declining and living with serious illness, an adult child can start living with the feeling that the call could come just about at any time. But what does that kind of waiting do to a caregiver before the death has even happened?
That's going to be a case-by-case answer.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to depend on any caregiver's level of their own personal anxiety. So if you're, the more anxious of a person you are in general, the more that, if we think of it, if we try to scale it. So let's say we have a very non-anxious person at a 1 and a pretty anxious person at a 5 or a 6. If you're bracing for bad news, it probably notches you up a few, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so like for a person who's not very anxious, they'll become a little bit, but a person who's pretty anxious will become very anxious. So there's, you're going to see some, I have a colleague who calls it body locking. You're going to see some tension in the body. You're going to start noticing people complaining of being sore or stiff. And that's sort of your system reacting the way we react when we get flooded with cortisol or when we're under pressure. We sort of lock up. And so people will kind of notice it in their body first. Something that's kind of interesting that happens to caregivers is because their focus is outward, is external, they start missing internal cues. They forget to eat. They don't respond to cues of thirst. They don't get enough sleep. They're bracing for something, for an external stimulus, so they are not attending to internal stimuli. So you see, and you probably see this all over the place. You see self-care start to go down a little bit.
You're in the external scanning mode when you're just hyperadrenergic and full of cortisol and well described, yeah. So how does someone carry the fear of losing a parent without actually letting that fear steal the time they have left with them?
My goodness. I might get a little emotional here. There's a magic word. It's such a simple answer. When I say that, it's easy for me to say, real hard to pull off. That stage that we spend so much time talking about, called acceptance, that's a really complex and beautiful arena, that abstract concept of acceptance. Everyone is going to be able to accept a small part of loss. Everyone's going to be able to, for example, if you're adults, we're unlikely to go into childlike denial. So we can accept that it's a fact that someone's going to die. If during that sort of bracing phase, as we're calling it, this kind of like waiting for the bad phone call, if caregivers can be very attentive, and I wish that I could make this like a daily meditative part of our culture. If caregivers could be more attentive to their own exercise of accepting that it's okay. If I get the call today, it's okay. It's okay. I've gotten what I could get out of this relationship. I've done what I can do up to this day. And acceptance, not just of the loss of someone, not just of death as a concept, but an acceptance that we only have so much time. So all of this unfinished business or things I didn't say, well, you did the best you could with the time that you had. And that's accepting the reality of being human, the reality of human condition, the reality of human relationships, accepting that, yeah, you might not have gotten to get in all the final words or complete all the projects and the tasks or be able to work through these old conflicts, and acceptance. But that's life. That's okay. It's okay. Religion helps a lot of my clients. My more religious clients lean on religion during those times. That helps them with acceptance, accepting that the Judeo-Christian religions have an idea that, God will, protect them. They'll go off to heaven and they'll be in the next place. I have some polytheistic clients, and they're a more nature religion. They accept, like, okay, well, the spirit will go into the trees and into the ground and all around me into the air. So for your listeners who are religious, I would say leaning on religion can really actually enhance your last days with your loved one. They can make them better because religion helps us to accept. And for the non-religious clients, accepting that this is that this can be a beautiful part of life. That there's some beauty in those last days, and you don't have to overwhelm yourself by trying to make the best of them, or trying to pack up all the old business, or complete all the old projects, or say all the old things. It's going to ruin it. Accepting that you're human, that your loved one is human, and you did what you could with the time that you had, and that's good enough. And that's okay.
That really echoes the last thing that Greg Fougere said on an episode some time back, is that you are enough, you've been enough. And I think, when you think about how strapped caregivers are for time, and we see it in comments on social media and their correspondence with us, there's a level of frustration when the self-care lists become long, and there's that permeating concept of just, I have no time to take care of me. But a meditation, as you described, about acceptance, and that I am enough, and I've been enough, and we will be enough to get through this, is so powerful and could really dominate the self-care to-do list in a meaningful way if chosen.
Yeah, that could be the self-care itself.
Caregivers are so often expected to be practical, and I think they manage appointments, ask questions, organize care, and make decisions in a very masterful way. But inside that role, they may feel like the child who's terrified of losing mom and dad. What happens when the capable adult and the frightened child are actually both present in the same room at the same time?
What a great question. Mostly nothing. Mostly nothing. It's okay. It's all right. Probably for the caregiver. When I say mostly nothing, I mean on the outside. I don't think anyone's going to really notice. For the caregiver, however, that can be real confusing because the child is driven by emotion and the adult is driven by logic and practicality. And there can be, I've seen in myself and my clients, there can be some really unhelpful shaming going on. I'm embarrassed to admit to you that when I need to be taking care of my father-in-law and I get emotional, I can hear a nasty little voice in my head saying, "Oh, don't be a baby." Right. And so that doesn't show up on the outside, but on the inside, there's a conflict there with my little girl that's crying and sad and wants to throw a tantrum, and my adult who needs to make sure that the nurse gets here on time, because if he's not nebulized by this time, he won't be able to take his medication. I mean, the adult in me has no patience for this. Can I tell you this little side story that my daughter she writes little stories. When she was real young, 5 and 6 years old, she wrote stories. And she wrote a story one time, and it was called "No Time for Ow." And I did not realize it was this small moment that we had where I'm the practical, logical adult, and we were trying to get out the door, and we're late. And I forget what it was, but we couldn't be late. And I'm telling her to grab her shoes, and I forgot my bag, and we need breakfast. So I need to grab breakfast. We're going to have to eat it in the car. And she trips and falls. And she goes, "Ow!" And I turned around and I said, "No time for ow!" and it really stayed with her so much that years later I read this story called "No Time for Ow." And I think that little anecdote from my child rearing, in my home, I think that's what it's like for a caregiver. I think when you have the little girl present and the impatient, practical adult present, there can be some neglect, maybe a little emotional neglect of the part that's scared, of the part that's sad. And I think the best thing to do about that is take a breath and step outside and have a good cry or a good moment, and realize that crying doesn't last very long. We only cry for a couple of seconds usually, or a couple of minutes, and then we kind of pull ourselves together. But maybe for your listeners to hold in mind that in those times, you have to be a good parent to your little self. You have to be a good nurturing parent to your little self. And you can still get the practical stuff done. There is time for ow.
And there may be a series of little ows that culminate in the final loss itself, but maybe addressing those actually makes the highly capable caregiver actually much more capable of navigating that emotional journey.
Yeah, I think so. I think you get to see it. The practical side gets to almost check it off the list. Like, okay, I gave myself a hug. Now I have a lot of real estate in my mind. Now I can focus on this until next time.
For some adult children, the coming loss also feels, and you alluded to this earlier, that last chance to hear the apology, the acknowledgement, the blessing, the honest conversation they've wanted to have for years. How does that change the way someone prepares for a parent's death?
The biggest change that I've observed is it is not a good change. It puts the caregiver in a hurry, and that doesn't help anybody. The caregiver starts to feel hurried and rushed. We mentioned it before, the pressure of wanting to of realizing the deadline's approaching, and we need to get this done before the deadline is unnecessary. I like to have my families confront their fears. So have you ever noticed when we use that "what if" phrase, we hardly ever answer ourselves. So we say, what if he dies? And I try to help my clients face it. So I say, okay, well, Let's answer that. So what if he dies? What if he dies and you don't get the final conversation? You don't get to say what you wanted. You don't get to hear what you wanted to hear. What if? Then what? And I have them, and I would encourage your listeners to really let yourself walk down that path. So what does that look like if I don't get this thing that I want, or I don't get to finish something, or if there's business left over, then what? And I will tell you that almost all the time, when you get to the end of that path, that exercise, the answer is nothing. It's okay. And if you can do that, what it does then is then you look back at this pressure you're putting on yourself and you can release it. As you say, oh, if I don't get the apology, if I don't get to work through this conflict, if I don't get to finally say this thing I've been wanting to say my whole life, that's okay.
It may also allow you to be that much more present for the time you have left if you can unload that. And it's really nice to sort of see that sort of thinking that's out there, that 85% of the things we worry about never happen, can even apply to that niche of caregiving and those fears as death approaches. And it's so universally adaptable, and certainly an exercise that's coachable.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your call out to the listeners to explore that. I mean, how do we begin to accept as a caregiver that you may need to actually grieve the parent without ever receiving the repair you'd hoped for that would come before the end? Can we grieve with unresolved agenda items?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. We do it whether we want to or not. When we face loss and grief, we face a truth of the human condition. Grief is not orderly nor elegant, and we don't like that. The grieving process, the losing process, is disorganized. It's messy. It's often nonsense and irrational. And this is very unsettling to human brains. We don't like this at all.
Crying in the car while you're parked or you're stopped at a red light?
Like that.
Like,
yes.
Where does that come from?
And before they've even died, and kind of going like, wait a minute, the time, this is not in order. This is not how this goes. The most helpful thing that you can do in those moments is realize that what you're trying to do is create an order to something that has no order. And that is true of most of life. I'm sure you know that exercise where you draw the circle of control. You draw a circle, and in the side of the circle, you write the things that are under your control, and outside of the circle, you write the things that are not in your control. And clients giggle all the time because they realize what's inside of the circle are maybe 2 or 3 things. Everything else is outside of the circle, right? And so this idea that we want this to be orderly and organized, and we want it to be elegant and articulate, is sort of a fool's errand. And there's only a few places in life that that's going to work out. I joke with my husband that, he can be messy on his side of the room, but my side of the room is the only place in my life that I can control. And so I would like that to be organized and orderly, because nothing else in my life is orderly, even if I have a calendar and an appointment book and a stopwatch and a schedule and an idea of how I'd like my day to go. In that time when we are trying to figure out how are we going to grieve without these things being done, sort of accepting, well, you're not getting something that you wanted the way that you wanted it, and you'll be fine, because that's been most of your life. Most of our lives have not gone the way that we wanted them to go, and we were fine. I'm noticing I keep answering your questions in this same sort of realizing at the end of the day that it's going to be okay. And we don't think that in the moment. We don't think it's going to be okay. We think it's going to be awful. We think we're never going to survive it. And when you really face the fear, you look closely at it, you see, oh, it's messy and it's out of order and non-sequential, and it didn't happen the way I wanted it to, and it's not happening the way that I wanted it to, and that's okay. I'm okay.
I'd like to change gears a little bit. and focus a little bit on the conversations that occur before the final goodbye. And as you know, many adult children know that they need to ask their parents what they want, what matters to them, what should happen if their health changes. But starting that conversation can be really difficult and maybe could even feel like betrayal, especially if naming death means, in the parent's mind, that the child's giving up on the parent. Why are these conversations so hard to begin?
Yeah. Well, we want to believe that we're going to live forever. So there's that sort of simple answer. And we don't want to believe that this is real and true. Before I answer, I want to direct your listeners to these. I can give you one example, but I know there's several examples of these booklets and these programs that are put out. The one that I'm familiar with is called Caring Conversations. And the idea is that you're supposed to have these conversations before any of this, when your parents are young still, when they're in their 50s and 60s. And starting the conversation way early when parents are very healthy, that actually sets a precedent in the relationship that death is something that we openly talk about. And so you revisit the conversation from time to time. Or if there's a hospital stay, you say, hey, is there anything you want to change in those answers that we came up with together? And it becomes sort of rule in the relationship. In this relationship, we openly talk about death and what happens when we die. So the first thing I want to say is there's a way to avoid that trepidatious feeling of later in life by starting much, much, much earlier with those conversations. We did that with my father-in-law. My husband was the one who found the program. And I loved it so much that I went home and did it with my very healthy parents at the time. And, when you're young and, I think my parents were in their 60s or early 70s or something and no health issues really. And at that time, it's a much easier conversation to have because it's still in the abstract because you still have your delusion of immortality at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope
That's
that,
huge.
it sets the precedent. For those who have not done that,
and there are those families out there who are really non-communicating families where, silence is the tone and we don't talk about that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are harder. This is I worry that I'm going to sound glib here, and I don't mean to be. There, if you're a member of one of those families, be the one to say the word. Be the speak the word, and say out loud, we need to talk about your death. We need to talk about your passing. That's scary in those families because that's the D word and we don't talk about that. And there's a lot of fear about how you'll be perceived by your family. You'll be perceived as belligerent. You'll be perceived as uncaring and insensitive. You'll be perceived as materialistic. You're just focused on the money and the inheritance. You'll be perceived as obnoxious. There's all these fears about how you'll be perceived. And I think the talk about death trumps how you'll be perceived. Try to realize you're going to be perceived how you're perceived. If you can, set that aside and be the one who says the scary word and who starts the conversation. And I bet that months later, years later, you'll actually be the one who is thanked for having the courage to get those conversations started. I say that with certain families there's more tension and family conflict. In other families where there's still a silence rule, but there's not as much tension and conflict, in those families, the person who speaks, the person who says, hey, we need to talk about death, or we need, hey, we need to make some plans about what this looks like, the rest of the family members breathe a sigh of relief, usually, that
someone broke the ice. Someone
finally said it. Yeah. Yeah. And so if you're from one of those families, I think I want to say, have no fear. You're going to be a savior, but to be the one that actually opens the door.
But how does the adult child bring up not just death, but decline, final wishes, and responsibilities without actually worrying that the parent's going to say, hey, you're rushing things here.
I think the best strategy is to make it about you. And what I mean by that is not, don't make it selfish. What I mean by that is saying, hey, I am scared of the day that I lose you. I'm scared of losing my parent. I want you in my life forever. And so since I'm scared of it, what will help me not be so scared and stop thinking about it, what will help me be in the present and with you is knowing that there's a plan. And so if you could do this favor for me and let me know that there's a plan, now I can settle and be present with you and enjoy this relationship and have these experiences with you.
I can imagine that conversation may need to have a couple of variations, but at the same time, maybe even some repetition to chip away at some of the exterior that some parents may have that is part of their shield and how they've coped with life until now. So I imagine if you try once and you don't quite hit the ball out of the park, but keep trying, keep swinging.
Keep trying and maybe experiment with your timing. The first time, did you choose a bad moment where were your parents sleep deprived or hungry, or did you choose a time that there wasn't really enough time to have the conversation and your parent felt sort of pressured and rushed? Did you choose a time that was too soon after a hospitalization or a surgery? So play with timing there. And I like what you said. If it doesn't, if at first you don't succeed, keep choosing different moments. Keep trying. Your parents know that they're going to die. I'm a parent. I know that I'm going to die. All parents want to die before their children. We know this. And if it goes the way we hope, we will. We will die before our children die. And so I think your parents, whether no matter what their level of willingness is to talk about it, they know. They know that they need to make some plans. We all know that we need to make some plans. They might not be verbose about it. They might give you answers like, well, I don't know. You decide. You decide what you want to do. I have a elderly man that I work with, and I like him because his take on it is he doesn't talk about it. He doesn't want to talk about it. He's funny because he openly talks about how he's terrified of death and doesn't want to think about it, doesn't want to talk about it, but at the same time realizes when it happens, he doesn't care because he'll be gone. So you guys decide what you want to do because the funeral's really about you and the burial's really about what you want to do. Be open to the idea that your parents might be more savvy than you realize.
Well, and it doesn't automatically brand them as being careless in terms of getting their wishes and their affairs in order. They may be, very high functioning up until that point, but facing those next level decisions and discussions just really forces that facing of their own mortality. Right. But what happens when the adult child facing, when the parent's avoidance is so strong? It can just leave everyone else in the family carrying the uncertainty together. And that can be pretty draining too for a family.
I have an answer to that. I don't know how popular my answer will be because I think it might be a little Texas of me. If the parent is being avoidant and my cousin is going through this kind of refusing to sit down and have talks, refusing to answer. I say strong arm it. I say, okay, we tried to play with the different timing, different moments. We tried to pick a different mood for you to be in. We tried to pick a different, and not to the parent, but for the loved ones to get together and say, okay, let's at least have a plan. Let's all get together and have a plan for what we think should happen, how we think the matters should be settled. The reason I'm in favor of, I know, sort of an abrasive approach, is because having a plan, you have no idea. You will be astounded at what having a plan does to your tension, to your anxiety. Even if the plan doesn't come to fruition, having a plan, feeling like, okay, I know what to do if the worst happens, it really calms the system. It really kicks in the neuropeptides that make you start to breathe again and be present. I also wonder, I'm thinking of particular families that I work with, you got to do a self-check here, guys. Is the reason that your parent is avoiding this, is because you're being too aggressive, is because your anxiety is coming out of your pores. If you're able to give yourself a plan and breathe, your parent might experience you as calmer and more approachable, and make it easier, make the environment easier to discuss something sensitive.
I like how you brand that. And, it's not a one-off conversation that's written in stone. Ironically, the death plan is a bit of a living organism.
Right. I love that. That's a great irony. Yeah.
Potential second and third iterations, but at least the conversation gets started.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure you're familiar probably with birth plans. When women are pregnant, they tell us, our coaches, they tell us to come up with a birth plan, and you're supposed to write down, if you want an epidural, or if you're supposed to write down what happens in the terrible case, what happens if my baby dies, what happens if I go into a cardiac arrest, and it's funny because the naive mothers like me will show up to the hospital and hand the birth plan to the doctors and the nurses, and the reaction you get from the medical staff is sort of laughing at you. Like, what is this supposed to do? We know what to do. We're the medical staff. We know exactly what to do if this happens. And you don't realize until after the fact, or maybe more savvy women than I do, realize, oh, the plan wasn't for the medical staff. It was for my own anxiety. It was for my
own. For your partner to have that mutual landing pad, if you will.
Yes. Yeah.
So how do you talk to a parent about their responsibility to the people who'll be left behind without turning the conversation into sort of pressure, blame, or a fight?
Tell me what you mean here. Or do you mean the like the financial responsibility?
Well, no, I think the responsibility of engaging in the conversation. When you're hitting that wall and they've dug their heels in, it creates next level tension and stress within the family and those who are left behind. So we don't want that conversation to be imposing of even more pressure and more blame on the ill parent, and we don't want it to turn into a fight. But there is possibly a responsibility to the generation that's going to be left behind after a parent's death. How do you navigate that conversation?
There are simple phrases and sentences that help to navigate that. It requires some confrontation, not the hostile kind, but definitely the tense kind. The caregiver, the loved one, the adult child, has to confront the parent and say a couple of sentences. Hey, we're a family, and you owe us this. That's the first one. The second one is, your death is not all about you. It's going to affect all of us profoundly. That's usually enough for sort of a, you're not going to get the cartoon, oh, gee, you're right, thanks for that. You're going to get more of a begrudging, all right, fine, what do you want to know? What? Ask me your questions. But at least you've started the conversation, right? I think it is 100% okay for family members to confront one another when there is obligation. And this would apply not just to death and dying. This would apply to pulling your weight in the family when you're not helping out with the family chores. This applies to getting a job. This applies to launching when you're a teenager. This applies to all kinds of things. When you are a member of a family, it ain't all about you. You owe the family. You are in obligation to other people. I actually think this is a beautiful design of humanhood. I love this. I love that we are living our entire lives obligated to one another because it insists on humility and community. It makes us humble and community oriented. And so even in this case, call them out and say, hey, you're being selfish. This is not all about you. This affects all of us.
That is just so powerful, in that call out can actually fall on deaf ears, not just the person whose death is foreshadowed, but other family members. And we see this coming up a lot, where despite some element of, awareness trying to be raised that, yes, you're part of this, you need to participate, you need to help, there's always that one caregiver who's drowning in it all. How do you champion the cause when you're facing the obstacle of just no responsiveness to the call?
I think it goes back to what I said before. You probably should strong arm it. Then you need to make the plan without the person. So there is here we come to acceptance again. There is some acceptance that's going to have to happen here, and it's an acceptance of this is not going to go well, and that sucks, and that's bad news. That's a disappointment, and again, it's okay. We deal with disappointments. We deal with difficult things. If your caregiver is just not your caregiver. If your dying loved one is just a non-starter, just you can't get through. Well, it's either going to be you or the medical staff making decisions. And that's messy. And so there's going to be inevitable controversy, and that's a real pain, and it's going to be part of this, I think. I think there needs to be an acceptance around that. Because if you get to that point and there isn't, and your dying loved one is not controversial about it, then it's kind of a bonus. Then you did the right thing by making your own plans, working with the medical staff or other caregivers, so that at least somebody knows what's going to happen. But that's it's funny, Mark. You're asking me, what do you do with a difficult family member? The same thing we've always done with difficult family members. We sort of accept, look, this is who they are. They're going to make this difficult for me, difficult for everyone, and this is sort of part of my cards, part of the hand I was dealt. This is what I got. And so you play your hand the best you can.
And you may actually have a pretty good skill set at playing that hand. You've just never been called to play it, but you may be pleasantly surprised if that inner caregiver critic is not pounding on you, and that you can actually show yourself some grace. Yeah. I mean, it's in this circumstance, though, for an adult child who's caregiving, to be prepared to honestly talk about death, it can be pretty tough to be shut down.
Yeah.
How do you advise your families, your caregivers to cope with that?
To cry, to let your feelings be hurt, to be unbelievably gracious and generous with yourself at yet another disappointment. If your loved one has shut you down, it is very unlikely that that's the first time that has happened. It is more likely that that has happened in your relationship your entire life. And if it helps, you can view it as another letdown in this relationship and recognize that those hurt so bad, and you'll heal. It'll take some time. You'll heal, but really, really nurture yourself in those moments. You didn't do anything wrong. You're doing the right thing. You're dealing with a difficult person, and difficult people hurt people. And you might get hurt in those instances, and then go back to I'm giving you permission to strong arm it. Go back to throwing your hands up and saying, "Fine, I'm doing this without your input. Then I'm coming up with a plan for my own well-being, for my own mental state, so that I can show up and be as good a caregiver as I can to you,
and for the family's well-being too."
Yeah,
I think one thing I'd add to that is that if you're going to cry, you don't have to cry alone.
Yeah. Turn to the other victims, if you will. turn to your support system. I'm a therapist, so I will say turn to a therapist. We're really good at tears. We welcome them.
A lot of adult children imagine that the nearest end. A lot of adult children imagine that near the end, everything will finally become clear, and the parent will open up. The old wounds will actually soften, and the right words will be said, and the relationship will somehow come together. How realistic is that hope, and can it even happen in moments of terminal lucidity?
Unlikely. I'm sorry. Can it happen? I'm sure it can happen. But that feels like, me telling my daughter that sure, she could be a movie star. I mean, is the possibility there? I guess so. It's so rare.
Could, but don't count on it.
Exactly. It could, but don't count on it. We go out the way we've lived. If we have lived in a certain personality, if we have lived in a certain state of mind, if we've lived with a particular attitude about the world and the people in it, that's probably how we're going to go out. Better to, it's so funny how much I'm using the word accept in this conversation. Better to accept the person as they are. This is my dad. He's kind of a blowhard. So he's probably going to go out as a blowhard, right? This is my mom. She's reserved and quiet and never talks about anything difficult. So she's probably going to go out that way. We go out the way we've been living, hoping and praying for that fantasy deathbed scene from a Hollywood movie. Sure, you can hope for it, but don't go to Vegas and bet on it.
So someone can find acceptance and forgiveness without receiving the apology,
Yes.
the accountability, the tenderness, or the understanding they've felt they've needed to be okay with.
That's the ballgame, Mark. That is what you're accepting. What you're accepting is, oh, I'm not going to get this thing I so long for. Oh, this thing I've been hoping for my whole life. Ever since I was a kid, I've wanted my dad to say he was proud of me. And I know finally this day is going to come. That is what you're accepting. You're accepting, oh my God, that day's not coming. It's not going to come, or it didn't come. And yes, that when we say acceptance, that is the acceptance.
It's the bottom of the ninth and the other innings have been played.
Yes.
So how then can an adult child enjoy the time that's left with a parent when the fear of loss can so easily turn every visit, every conversation, and every moment of silence into a test of whether they're truly present?
I like preparation. I like sitting in the car for a minute before I go in to see my father-in-law. And and maybe we're coming full circle here, kind of giving my little girl inside, giving her a hug and saying, I know you're scared. I think people underestimate how even just acknowledging that I'm afraid reduces the fear. Even just acknowledging, oh, there it is. I'm afraid. It sort of, it activates that nervous system, right? The autonomic nervous system. It kind of goes, okay, all right. It's sometimes I think of fear and that what was that cartoon movie where the fear cartoon was the purple guy, and if you just kind of said, I see you over there, he says, oh, okay, all right. I'm glad you see me. So preparation, kind of sitting before an encounter with a loved one, saying like, I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of this person dying. The other thing that I really like is, big shocker, is talking, is sitting with my loved one and saying those things out loud and letting it be okay that we say, I'm feeling really afraid today. Your loved one, I'm going to get emotional again. Those can be such beautiful connecting moments. If I'm so vulnerable to say it out loud to my person that I'm sitting with and say, I'm so scared. Sometimes they say, oh, honey, there's nothing to be afraid of. Sometimes they say, I am too. Sometimes they say, really, what are you afraid of? So, and you have these, those moments, Mark, where it's human to human and it's real and it's authentic and you just feel like you're in a bubble with this person. You can create those moments by actually saying it out loud to the person how you feel, about the circumstances, or walking in and saying, this is a tricky time we're going through, isn't it? Say it out loud and the other person saying, oh God, I'm so glad you said something. You have these all of a sudden it's just the two of you and it's just your eyes and it's just your hearts and it's just your feelings and it's just the two of you having these moments. My God, is there a better way to spend those last days than those authentic connections?
Well, that also gives the dying parent a chance to parent one more time in one more moment.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that. Yeah, it's beautiful. And what a gift. What a gift to the dying parent to be able to say, oh, sweetheart, there, one last time.
All right, I got to get a Kleenex and we're going to take a break. And we've made it a point to invite our illustrious production team to share questions, and I'm going to call on Fred and Graham to join.
All right, Angela, let's talk about my mother. You invited me to talk about my mother last time. We didn't talk about her. We talked about some other things, but I think it's time to revisit that. So I'm in a position now where I'm trying to get my mother to talk about her wishes, what's going to happen with her estate, and I'm approaching it really from a position of we need you to protect my brother and I. And even in that language, I'm reverting back to a much younger version of myself. So I show up as the 51-year-old Fred, and I'm the one that brings these important, issues and tries to broach the subject and get her to talk about it. But as soon as the questions or the statements are out of my mouth, it's no longer the 51-year-old version of me that's listening for the response. It's the latchkey kid because I'm Gen X. It's the latchkey kid. It's the person who experienced disappointments, sort of looking through the lens of like all of the challenges from my childhood. And I'm just kind of thinking to myself, can you just get this one thing fucking right before the end? Can you just figure this one thing out? And if you can figure this out, let's just wipe the slate clean. I have no other issues. Can you just be there for me in this one moment when it's really important before it's too late? And the timeline is attached to that too. So the clock's ticking, right? So there's a bunch of things happening. But I think one of the things that's really confusing for people is that they start the conversation as one version of themselves, and the listener or the person who responds or reacts to what's said or what isn't done or what's being done is the child. And that is extremely difficult because you're asking a question from one place, you're responding from another place, and then you have to sort of piece that together in real time as you're trying to negotiate whatever's going on. Could you speak to that a little bit more and just maybe help me understand how I can not be petitioning from my like 12-year-old self, but staying in my adult self so I can better deal with whatever happens?
Yes. Before I answer, are we billing your insurance or are you going to pay me out of pocket?
I'll pay you out of pocket. Actually, Mark's going to pay, so that's one of the perks.
I got your back.
Okay, so I want to ask you, before I answer, let me get a little bit more information. How were you? What were you feeling when I was talking about that old fear of abandonment, of my parent dying, being repressed, and that repressed our whole lives and then kind of reawakening? Did you resonate with that? Is that happening for you when you're talking with your mom?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's
yeah.
A lot of the themes from this conversation have actually been resonating pretty strongly. But definitely trying to keep that down. And I feel her trying to do it too. She doesn't want to, she's 77 and she's like, this isn't time for this conversation. I'm still so young. And I'm like, but it's time for some kind of conversation, Mom, because you are 77 years old.
Yeah. So when you're kind of meeting this resistance with your mom, you're bringing up a timely issue. You're really trying to talk about. You're trying to be practical. You're trying to be the adult, logical self. You're getting some resistance from your mom, and she's saying, maybe later, whatever she's saying. Do you in those moments? I think. I think all of us can relate to those moments, because what happens inside of us is the child wakes up with a fierce intensity and stomps and shouts and give me my cookie now, right? And we throw these internal temper tantrums in the moment. So, Fred, what if that's okay? What if in those moments, if you throw the adult version of this kind of childlike temper tantrum, and maybe you're a little embarrassed of yourself, and maybe you're shaming yourself for not being able to hold it together as an adult, and maybe you're kicking yourself for just reverting right back to this childhood dynamic. But what if that is the only way this conversation's going to happen? You remember what I said about grief is not orderly, and it's messy. And you're giving us such a beautiful example of messy, of disorganized and sort of dirty grief and planning for loss, right?
And timelines that are all over the place, because as I'm listening to the conversation with her and my child self comes forward and feels, all of this hurt and like they're not being cared for, like my 51-year-old self is looking at my mom going, how can you not care for this young kid? Like, how can you not care for this child? Right? It's not even about like, how can you not care for the present version of who I am? But it's inside, I'm thinking like, how can you let this young child down like this? Like, what are you doing? Like, I don't understand.
Well,
So there's all of these different, it gets really, the timelines get mixed up all in the same conversation in real time.
Yes. And that's the messiness, right? Your ability to grant your mother grace in those moments will be your life preserver. So your ability to forgive your mother, instead of thinking, how could you do this to me? Thinking to yourself, you're terrified. You're scared to death. Fred, it's weird, but in those moments, and they don't happen a lot until the latter stages, you're the parent. So that little boy inside of you, go ahead, throw the temper tantrum. And by the way, let it be messy. Don't shoot for this elegant, articulate conversation. Let it be messy. Let him out even. Let him scream at her if you need to. But return to this notion that in that moment, you're the parent. You're the parent who is saying to your mother, they're there.
That's so important, because like, who is she in this moment? Who is she showing up as? I see the outside frame and I see the 77-year-old, but in those moments, if she's terrified of dying or she doesn't want to face her mortality, she could be 12, she could be 6, she could be,
Yes.
I'm not giving her the same grace as I've come to this understanding about myself and where I am, but I haven't allowed that for her.
Right. And I think we all make that mistake at first. And when it dawns on us, like, oh my God, nobody wants to raise your hand if you're looking forward to death. There's no one wants to face this. And here I am saying, hey, mom, face this. Well, of course she's reverting to her childhood self. Here's my chance to say they're there. Here's my chance to say, I got you, mom. I see you. I see you're flipping out over there.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
So where should I send Mark should send the invoice or what to receive?
I'll bill you guys.
Okay.
That was an amazing conversation, and I think a lot to be learned. And we learn so much from moment-centered and individual-centered experiences like that. And there's not one that's exactly the same. And if you take 3 or 4 blueprints, well, they can guide the construction of a project. If you superimpose all of them, all the lines are blurred, and everyone brings a different blueprint to the conversation. So it's not as easy as just merging blueprints, but it's looking at blueprints on either side and sort of coming up with a final draft, which probably needs to be tweaked. And I think that conversation between Fred and his mom and your description of what can be done is really so elegant in terms of tweak those blueprints as you're trying to merge them, because you may not get a sound building if you just superimpose them and try and hack it out.
That's a great metaphor for sure.
So, Angela, many adult children carry this private fear of the moment the call comes and you hear your parents died. You need to come now. What happens when the moment they've feared, imagined, and rehearsed in their mind finally becomes real?
Time stops. There's a weird, like a special effect in a movie where you can't feel your hands and the walls get blurry and time stops. And you hear yourself talking. You hear yourself asking questions, but you're not registering any information because your worst fear as a child has occurred. And so your system is behaving precisely the way it is programmed to behave. It is in Well, I think emergency workers call it shock, right? It is in the initial nervous system response of fight flight, because we perceive that irrationally as the ultimate danger. And so in that moment, everything is blurry. You can't hear very well. You can't see very well. You start watching your body move in automatic gestures. You start doing things. You hear your voice, like I said, automatic. You're probably behaving quite beautifully. You're probably saying polite things to the person who's making the call, but you're not really present in that conversation. And then you hang up and you stand there and you panic. The panic sets in. And you panic and you mistakenly think you need to do something right away. You need to call someone. You need to handle something. You need to get your hands busy. You panic and you need to do something right away. And some of us do. Some of us panic and then we do something right away. And all of a sudden you're organizing your socks, or all of a sudden you're calling everyone in creation, right? And you're doing something. That doing something can be interpreted as the fight response. No. I'm not doing. I'm fighting against this. Fighting against this. That panic lasts different time periods for different people. It's pretty short for most of us who are expecting the call. That panic period is pretty short. Next comes logistics. And that is a crucible of tension and confusion and frustration. And you get through that, and then you start grieving. Or in many cases, you return to the grieving that you began in the dying process.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what you're describing is that lack of belief that the moment actually arrived. But I really like that thought about time standing still. Do you think it's actually like that strange collision between shock and recognition?
Oh, I haven't thought about it that way. I think yes. Yes, I do. Because it feels like a crash. It feels like two incompatible ideas. Yeah.
I can see where then you're just in that sort of suspended ether as those two ideas are colliding.
Yeah, and it feels celestial. It feels massive. It feels big. It feels like a cataclysm in space. Yeah.
So how does grief change when the adult child actually gets to be present for a parent's final days or final moments compared to with losing them suddenly or finding out after the fact?
Oh, I get that question a lot. That's a really good question. And honestly, I don't think that I'm going to be so arrogant as to answer. And let me explain what I mean. I don't think any of us have an answer for that, because we have this fallacious idea that we can prepare for death. And so we do. And when we say, I'm not talking about logistic plans and financial planning and estate. I'm not talking about that. That we can plan for. But planning for how we're going to feel or being able to prepare emotionally for death is a fallacy. And so when you think about that it feels differently if the death is gradual and expected than it feels if it's unexpected and in my field what we call discontinuous. I can see the reasoning for that. And I'm going to go off for just a minute. When you think about how we're raised and the stories that we're told and the movies that we watch and the books that we read, all of the stories sort of sell us a false idea that human life goes like this. You're born and then you're a kid and then you go to school and then you graduate and then you get a job and then you get older and then you die, right? And all the movies and all the stories and all the fairy tales, they sort of tell the story like that, when actually in a ton of cases around the world, that's not how death works. Death can happen at any time for children and adolescents and adults. And so I think in our minds, we have this idea, the difference between what we call a continuous change, meaning a change that's expected, that is continuous in the timeline. I was like you, most of us, they peddle the idea to us that our parents are going to die before us, and then we're going to die, and then our kids are going to die after us. And we're not, that's not a guarantee. That's not real. But because we're sort of, I guess, programmed to think like that, we also then believe that if we expect our parents to die, it will be easier. The emotion will be easier. Mark, I've never seen that to be the case. I don't know if there's research around that, but I will tell you anecdotally, I have never seen a difference. I've never observed a difference, nor have I felt a difference between losing someone when it's expected and losing someone when it's unexpected. I think rather than try to brace for emotion or plan to feel something, I think it's better to get our surfboards out and ride and let the emotion happen. I don't know if it's easier for us if someone dies when we expected them to. And I think it goes back to that repressed, that denial, that repressed fear that none of us ever want to lose a parent, even if the relationship is contentious. None of us want to lose a parent, whether it's expected or unexpected. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm feeling myself shy about answering that.
Well, I will have one day had the experience of both versions. And, maybe it'll appear in the chapter of a book I eventually write. I don't know.
Yeah, you'll let me know if you experience a difference.
We'll definitely be in touch about that one.
Cool.
For the adult child who was not there and did not get to say goodbye, or the kind of goodbye that they wanted, how do they avoid punishing themselves for the circumstances?
This goes back to that circle of control. It might even help to do the physical exercise. It might even help to draw the circle on a piece of paper and put inside of the circle the things you can control. Outside of the circle, the things you cannot control. The act of writing it down, realizing that the timing of my parents' death is 100% out of my control, can alleviate some of that guilt, can maybe help to forgive the self. It's okay. It's okay that you weren't there, that this is not something you can control. All of us have to deal with beating ourselves up over the things that we never got to say, or the forgiveness we never granted or never got. All of us are going to do some level of kind of guilting ourselves over that, and that's okay. Let's not punish ourselves on top of everything else with the timing of a parent's death that we had zero control over.
What about for those listeners who may find themselves estranged from loved ones, who are going to have to cope with that or are coping with the death of a parent after estrangement? Is the process any different?
Yes.
How do we successfully navigate that intact?
Yeah, that's you're opening a topic that's very difficult. Parental estrangement, child estrangement is excruciatingly painful. People who are estranged might not say that. They might not say that they experience pain. I would argue that they've adapted to the pain. It's actually excruciatingly painful. Someone who loses an estranged parent probably should sit in some therapy because what's the work in front of you is very difficult to do on your own. The work in front of you is you have to write a narrative that's a very difficult narrative to write, and it has to be cohesive, and it has to have a beginning, middle, and an end, and it has to be written in your favor and in the parent's favor. It has to be written in a way that is full of grace and forgiveness of human error and human flaw. And trying to do that on your own in the face of a grieving process might be too difficult, actually. And that's when I want to say we therapists would like to step in and help out with that. We would like to help people construct an understanding of their parent and their parent's passing in a way that is not harmful to the rest of their lives.
So don't feel you need to do it alone.
No, that is a Herculean task. Yeah.
After a parent dies, some caregivers feel grief, of course, but they may also actually feel relief that the parent is no longer suffering, relief that the waiting is over, and relief that they're no longer living under the fear of the call.
Yeah.
Why can that relief feel just so hard to admit?
We think that we're doing something wrong. If we feel better, any flavor of better, we think that we're doing something wrong. Please hear me loudly and clearly saying that that's actually a gift of death. There aren't a lot of gifts in death. So take the ones that are there, and the release of that burden, it's a gift. And you are allowed to not only receive the gift, but indulge in the gift. There is nothing wrong with your body feeling relief. It's not that you are happy that your loved one is dead. Well, unless you're happy that your loved one is dead. That's not what's going on right there. What's going on right there is that you have had a 20-ton weight on your shoulders and it has been lifted. And so, of course, your body is going to feel fresh and young again. Of course, you're going to feel some relief. Indulge in that relief, knowing what it's really about. It's about the lifting of the burden, not the passing of the person.
And it's also not a judgment about how much you may or may not have loved, because I imagine some really struggle with the difficulty of allowing relief to exist without treating it as evidence that they love their parent less than they thought.
There's a Judeo-Christian idea that I really love and I adopt in my own life, and it's the concept that love is binary, that you love, period. There's no degrees of love. There's no I love a lot or I love a little or I love more or I love less. You love. You love, period. That's it. It's that simple. Do you love your mother? Yes. Even in a difficult relationship, there's no loving less or loving more. There certainly are moments where you feel more connected to a person or you feel less and more distance from a person. That has nothing to do with love. Love is binary. I love my parent loves me. Check it off the list. Now attend to all the other emotions, all the complications in your mind about the things that went unsaid and the unfinished business, the relief of the burden now that that's over. Those are all separate. Love, let it be a pure, beautiful thing, almost in a vacuum. I love, and my parent loved, and that's the end of that part of the story. I can check that off.
In that vacuum, you don't even presumably need to really dissect how conditional or unconditional it was.
No.
Which I know is on a lot of people's minds these days.
It is. I maybe on another time we can have a conversation about how liberating it is to think that love, no matter what form it comes in, you can't measure it. There's no ruler or yardstick for it. There's like you said, there's no judgment. There's no Fahrenheit degree scale. It just is. It is or it is not.
Angela, when a parent dies, the relationship doesn't simply disappear, right? I mean, it changes form. And how does an adult child begin living with a parent who's no longer physically here, but still present in memory, identity, grief, and love?
Well, we sort of do it whether we want to or not, don't we? We still have to get the kids to school. We still have to eat lunch. We still have to go grocery shopping. We sort of do it. I have a friend who's also a therapist, and she says that you just take the grief with you. You put it, and you take the relationship with you. You put it in the front seat in the car, and you have it in the bathroom with you when you're brushing your teeth, and you don't really do anything. I hope you keep that relationship alive through memory and recall. If there's a a gravesite to visit. I hope you visit. I hope you talk to your loved one. This might be corny, but I am of the belief that they can hear us. We can't hear them. You dream about them. You talk often about them. You let yourself cry a lot in the beginning when you talk about them, and realize that over time you'll be able to talk about them without crying. I don't know. I guess it's sort of a simplified answer. You just do. You just do. You just have a relationship with them after they pass.
We hear people refer to the year of firsts.
Yeah.
The first birthday, the first Christmas.
Yeah.
But I imagine there can also be a way of renaming those into a new celebration of the memories that come with those special occasions. And there's probably a way of incorporating that into the experience of the year of firsts, where it could be a first new way of celebrating who that person was.
Mm-hmm.
Can someone find meaning in the caregiving, the waiting, the conversations, the unfinished pieces, and the final goodbye, so that the experience is not simply remembered as loss?
Well, that's an interesting question. I want to push back on your question a little bit. So I'm noticing my first instinct is to say, well, what's wrong with thinking about it as loss? It is loss. That's okay. It's part of the human condition. It's part of our life cycle. We can think of it as loss. But if you're saying, okay, but I don't want to, I want it to be more than that. Okay, well, it certainly can be more than that. You remember I think you and I were almost crying together. Remember I was talking about those authentic moments of connection when you say what's real and what's true when you visit your loved one. Well, those get encoded in memory too. And so when you think of the loss of your mom or the loss of your dad, if you slow down in that moment, if you're driving or falling asleep or parenting or having a moment in your workday, if you slow down and focus on that moment of loss, and then let it sort of, in my mind, I'm thinking of those graphics that sort of grow on your screen. Let it fill out with, oh yeah, but we had that moment, and I'll never forget that conversation we had, and kind of let the memory of loss expand, like a flower, sort of expand into incorporating all the memories around that loss. That can be, dare I say, pleasant, almost. Yeah. Yeah. First of all, don't be afraid of the memory being about loss. That's what it is, and it's okay. And people write poems and rock songs about that. It's a beautiful part of the human condition, and then let it grow into all the other things that were around that loss and that process.
I remember riding in the passenger seat after my dad had passed with the kids in the back, and my partner driving. And we were a big music family, and we took our kids to see Bon Jovi when they were 5. They were the coolest kids at Montessori.
Wow.
But I remember going to make a memory coming out. And this was fresh after my dad had passed, and just losing it.
Mm-hmm.
But the sense of catharsis is not to be underestimated, and it actually creates space for those enriched, rejuvenated memories in the face of loss. I'd like to thank you for all of the strength and strategy you've offered our listeners today in coping and in thinking about this. So, Angela, I wanted to thank you. And in this moment, I might just thank John also.
Oh, That's
Thanks
beautiful.
for joining us today. This wraps up the Caregivers podcast for another week, and see you back next time.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
I think one of the clearest reminders from this conversation today is that preparing for a parent's death is not only about the final moment, it's also about the watching, the worrying, the conversations we're all afraid to start, and the things we still hope we might receive before it's too late. And the ending may not give us everything we wanted. The goodbye may not happen the way we hoped. The apology may not come. The final conversation may not resolve what was unresolved for years. And still, there may be love, meaning, tenderness, and moments of connection inside the time that remains. We may feel grief, relief, regret, love, some anger, and gratitude all at once. But the relationship does not simply disappear when a parent dies. It changes form. For anyone listening who's afraid of losing a parent, I hope this conversation helps you feel less alone. I hope it gives you courage to say what can be said, grace for what never may be resolved, and permission to keep living after the loss comes. Before you go, please subscribe or follow the Caregivers podcast wherever you're listening or watching. And if the show's been helpful, please consider buying the team a coffee. The link's in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Before we wrap up, I wanted to remind you of something important. The conversations you hear on this podcast are here to inform, to support, to spark reflection. They're not a substitute for professional medical advice, care, therapy, or crisis services. Listening to this podcast does not create a doctor-patient or caregiver-client relationship between us. If you're facing a medical concern, health challenge, a mental health challenge, or a caregiving situation that needs guidance, I encourage you to reach out to a qualified professional who knows your story. If you're ever in crisis, please don't wait. Call your local emergency number or recognize crisis hotline right away. You deserve real-time help and support. The views you hear on this show, whether from me or my guests, are our own. They don't necessarily reflect any organizations we work with, or are part of, or have worked with, or been part of in the past. This podcast is an independent production. It's not tied to any hospital, university, or healthcare system. Thank you for being here, for listening, and most of all, for taking the time to care for yourself while you continue to care for others. I look forward to hearing from you.